Unlike any other kind of weather phenomena from the past, this storm was too dreadful, too violent. This was the power of nature, inspiring terror in all who saw it. Whoosh! As the torrential rains poured down, within the Secretariat Advisor residence, a young and handsome white-robed Confucian peered his head out and looked up at the sky with an uneasy look on his face. Heavenly phenomena can be seen whenever anything strange is going on. But just what's the cause? Li Junxian muttered to himself. There was nothing normal about the phenomena in the sky. The long history of the Confucian sect meant that it held many records and books. Such heavenly phenomena were extremely rare, and the last time a similar event occurred was more than 1,000 years ago. This was during the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, when he accepted Dong Zhongshu's advice and chose to dismiss the 100 schools and accept only Confucianism one. This was what it meant when it was said that the heavens and man were connected. When a major event took place in the human world, the world displayed a response. The imperial palace was also swept up in the storms, and in the very center of the palace, a silver-robed eunuch who seemed like a reincarnation of the Maitreya Buddha looked worriedly at the sky. Heavenly phenomena! This bodes ill. Gao Lisher grasped his horsetail whisk as he gazed at the pitch-black sky. His brow creased in worry as one blazing lightning bolt after another flashed by. Ha ha ha! Let him be! Yuani, when dynasties change, omens of dragons and snakes will appear, and times of great chaos are certain to bring about great chances. But this is a sign of a golden age. Just why are you so worried? Loud laughter came from within the hall. The soft sounds of coughing had just moments ago been resounding endlessly from the hall. But now, the owner of this voice was extremely excited and somewhat unable to suppress their joy. But at this moment, no one was more worried than the two people standing nearest to Wang Chang's study, Chang Sanyuan and Su Shixian. What's going on here? Su Shixian and Chang Sanyuan raised their heads and paled. Countless thunderstorms had appeared over the capital over the many years, but none of them had ever been like this. Not only that, the moment the weather changed, they had sensed an enormous pressure erupting from Wang Chang's study. At this moment, they felt like tiny ants confronting the vast might of the heavens, and they wanted to kneel down in fear. Almost instinctively, all of them sensed that these phenomena were connected to Wang Chong. Look over there! Chang Sanyuan called out, pointing upward. Following Chang Sanyuan's finger, the rest of them saw that right above the Wang family residence, precisely over Wang Chang's study, the clouds and wind had stirred into what was clearly a massive vortex. If one looked carefully, this vortex seemed to be the center of the storm, all the lightning arising from it. Chang Sanyuan and Su Shixian glanced at each other, deep shock in their eyes. As wind and lightning rained outside, within the study, Wang Chong seemed to sense nothing, apparently completely forgetting about the outside world. After writing the words "might makes right," Wang Chong had continued to write. In the history of humanity, countries rose up like trees, the countless countries forming an enormous jungle, and the jungle has its laws. When the lakes and rivers have dried up, fish can moisten each other with their slime, and mother birds will feel the need to feed their young birds. Meanwhile, hunting dogs will chase rabbits, wolves will chase hunting dogs, and tigers will chase wolves. The weaker creatures will become food for the stronger. This is the principle of the strong eating the weak, the survival of the fittest, the law of the jungle. Only the strongest can survive in this jungle. A single mountain has a limited amount of prey, a limited amount of resources. Over a long period of time, these resources can raise a single tiger, but if another tiger comes, there will not be enough food, making conflict inevitable. If the two tigers coexisted, then they would both be in danger of starving. Thus, a mountain cannot hold two tigers. This is the way it is with creatures, and so it is with countries. In the end, victory in a struggle is decided by body, physique, and martial force. The weak can only be driven away or die. This is the law of survival. So it has been since ancient times through dynasty after dynasty. All the states warred against Qin, but Qin was strong while the other states were weak, so Qin obtained the entire realm. At the end of the Han, the other kingdoms warred against the powerful Wei, but in the end, Wei survived while the other kingdoms were vanquished. The great Qin drove away the Xiongnu of the north through military force, not benevolence and righteousness. If the violent Qin had not been strong, the Hu would have invaded and wreaked havoc on the central plains. Han of Wu battled with Hu to the north and the barbarians to the south, and victory came because the armies of Han were strong, not because of the Confucianism proposed by Zhongshu. The Great Tang has been able to reach its current level of power and prosperity, the obedience of all the other countries, because they know that the Great Tang is strong, not that it is benevolent or righteous. The strong survive while the weak are exterminated. This is a law of heaven, a fixed constant. Like the sun and moon rising from the east and setting in the west, it cannot be changed. Since ancient times, no one has ever said that the weak survive while the strong are exterminated. Qin was replaced with Han because Qin was weak at the end while Han at the beginning was strong. Imagine if, at the Battle of Julu, Xianxia was defeated while the powerful Qin survived. In this present era, the environment has remained the same while only the people have changed. Wolves eat meat and deer eat grass. This is the nature of these animals. In this present age, the surrounding foreign countries are like wolves or tigers, openly reducing their armies while secretly training soldiers in defiance and biding their time. Meanwhile, the Great Tang, in the name of benevolence and righteousness, is reducing its armies, cutting off its arms and feet. This is a tiger removing its claws, hoping that by weakening itself, it can buy peace for all sides and an eternal end to war. Such conduct is like using one's own body to feed a tiger, carrying firewood to put out a fire, only fueling an endless flame. Once the Great Tang has weakened, the surrounding powers are certain to rise together to divide it. At that time, the divine land will be occupied. The Great Tang partitioned, calamity will visit itself on the people, and perhaps not even 1 in 100 will survive. On the day, it will be too late to regret. Since ancient times, those who use war to seek peace will create peace. But those who seek peace through compromise will bring about peace's end. If the Great Tang seeks peace for 100 generations, for all invasions to cease forevermore, it must strengthen itself, help itself, and one who helps themselves is helped by the heavens. Wang Chong's brush flew across the paper, writing 1 page, 2 pages, and with each page he wrote, he poured all his resentment, worry, and the thoughts accumulated over his several lives into his brush. Rumble. Lightning crisscrossed outside his window, shining brighter and brighter. Meanwhile, the sky itself had gone completely dark. Countless people within the capital spent an entire night under this dreadful black sky. Wang Chong's study was also thrown into disarray by the wind, the pages of books flapping and snapping. But Wang Chong's head remained buried in his work as he continued to write. Those who fall behind are certain to be beaten. If one does not wish to be a slave, if one wants true peace, one must constantly strengthen oneself. One must understand that might makes right. This is the only law of survival. After some time, Wang Chong wrote the final line and breathed a sigh of relief, the darkness and storms vanishing with it. The clouds scattered and the rains faded, light beginning to appear in the east. Wang Chong placed the brush back on the rack and lay back against his chair, a deep sense of fatigue on his face. This short night had consumed all his strength, and he felt more mentally exhausted than he did after any battle. He had already poured all his resentment and concerns into his words. But Wang Chong knew that this was far from over. The thick stack of paper on his desk recorded a new idea that was far beyond this era, and was certain to have an enormous impact on those that valued peace, benevolence, and righteousness above all. The world was crueler than all of them had imagined. Even if everyone did not understand him, Wang Chong still had to do this. Good medicine was bitter to taste. Loyal advice jarred to the ears. Wang Chong had no idea if his actions would have any effect or if it would influence the world in any way, but he had to try. Rumble. Suddenly, a peal of thunder resounded in his mind. Light and shadow twisted in the room as a familiar energy surged forward. This was the origin power of the world. Special event. The things user has written will have an enormous effect on history, influencing the entire world. There is an extremely high chance that the entire world will begin to walk an entirely unknown path. This event contains enormous risks, but also enormous rewards. It is impossible to determine the final effects. User has 3 seconds to consider. By setting these words aflame, the effects of this incident on the world will be reduced to 0. But user can also consider promulgating these ideas from another era to the world. But once these words are published, they will have a major effect on the Great Tang and trigger a massive backlash from the world. It could even lead to user eventually failing and being exterminated. The result is completely unpredictable. User, please consider carefully. User, please decide whether or not to publish this manuscript for the public. A string of messages rushed through his mind. This time, however, the stone of destiny's voice was tinged with unprecedented solemnity. Wang Chong continued to lean back on his chair, but his mind was abuzz. The light and shadow in the study continued to shift as if responding to the shifts in Wang Chong's thoughts. Wang Chong had never expected this manuscript to be so highly regarded by the Stone of Destiny. And not even the Stone of Destiny could determine what sort of effect the manuscript would have on this world. But Wang Chong did not hesitate for very long. Confirm. His voice was neither loud nor soft, but the moment he spoke, there was a deafening explosion as if the world was tearing itself apart. Buzz. The Stone of Destiny spoke once more in Wang Chong's mind. Major world event. Might Makes Right will soon be published. This event will have immense influence on the advancement of this world's history. Because this event far surpasses that of any other event in this world's history, user is awarded 100,000 points of destiny energy. But because this idea far exceeds the level of this era, is completely at odds with the era's way of thinking, and will cause a major deviation in the history of the world, starting from the day the manuscript is published, user will endure the powerful repulsion and backlash from the power of the world. Special warning. Starting from the day the manuscript is published, user will constantly consume destiny energy to resist the power of the world. Consumption of destiny energy will depend on the resistance from the world. If all destiny energy is consumed, user will be killed. This status will last until the event is concluded or user's ideas are completely accepted by this world. Wang Chong was dazed. He had never expected the situation before him. Ever since he had obtained a vast quantity of destiny energy in the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had not run into the world constraint. As long as one had enough destiny energy, the world constraints would have no effect on him, but this situation was clearly different. But before Wang Chong could think too deeply about this, the door opened, allowing Su Shixian, Su Kai, Cheng Sanyuan, and Xue Qinjun to rush inside. The 4 of them scanned the room before swiftly setting eyes on Wang Chong. They had been standing outside the door the entire night as Wang Chong was writing, all of them extremely uneasy. Your Highness, how are you doing? They stared with concern at Wang Chong behind his desk. Wang Chong's face was pale and he appeared to have gotten much thinner. But even though he was extremely fatigued, his eyes were shining brightly. Yet this only made them even more worried. Wang Chong only waved his hand. Su Shixian, Cheng Sanyuan, Xue Qinjun, Su Kai, I have a task for you. Take the manuscript on the table and then have it typeset, printed, and bound into books as quickly as possible. In my name, have the book distributed throughout the entire empire. In 3 days, I want the entire capital and every part of the empire to be able to see this book. Wang Chong extended a finger and pointed at the thick stack of papers on the desk. The study fell silent as everyone stared at the papers. The moment they had entered the study, they had noticed the stack of papers in front of Wang Chong, thickly covered in writing, the ink still wet. No one knew what Wang Chong had written, but they all knew that anything that Wang Chong had needed 5 days to write and that he spoke of so solemnly could not be simple. Yes. The 4 of them respectfully replied and stepped forward to take away the thick stack of papers. But the 4 of them had no idea that when they stepped out of the study, that thick stack of papers became destined to completely alter the Great Tang and the countries that bordered it. The storm had quickly passed, and as the eastern skies slowly brightened, the capital regained its calm. For the people of the capital, the heavenly phenomena produced by Wang Chong as he wrote in his study were a mere illusion and had not affected their lives very much. It was just an additional topic of conversation. Within the capital, the number of people marching had not decreased at all. The western part of the city, Lijiang Meat Bun Store. This steamed meat bun store was renowned throughout the capital. It was said that it was established by a couple with the surnames Li and Zheng, and had a history of 70-some years, passed down from father to son. Its meat buns were known for their thin, flaky skin and thick, tender, and fragrant meat filling. Many of its patrons would even walk for 2 hours to eat the meat buns from this store. In the early morning, steam was rising from the store while a fragrance filled the air. Many customers had gathered at the entrance. "Shopkeeper, give me 3 meat buns," said an azure-robed scholar of 30-some years, at the same time placing 3 copper coins on the counter. "Scholar, once you're done eating the buns, are you still planning to head to the tea house?" The owner of the store asked as he grabbed the buns. It was clear that he was very familiar with this scholar. "Heh, that's right," the scholar absent-mindedly replied as he turned to the bookstall next door. The bookstall was run by a bearded man of 40-some years. Every morning, this book merchant would come to this place to sell books. Unlike other countries, the Great Tang had a deep appreciation for books and learning. It wasn't merely the scholar class, but also the ordinary people who enjoyed buying and selling books, either to collect them or pass them down through their families. The azure-robed scholar happened to be fond of this hobby. Every day, he wanted to see if there were any newly published books, and once he found one, he would regard it as a treasure and immediately buy it so that he could take it home and carefully read it. But the scholar had not found any new books at this book merchant's stall for quite some time. Suddenly, the scholar's eyebrow rose as he noticed an additional book on display. "Might Makes Right? What a strange name." The scholar was taken aback. He had been reading since the age of 10, 20-some years of time, and he had seen all kinds of bizarre names for books. However, he had never seen one like this, and he was not able to determine what the contents of the book were from the title. This book gave him a completely different feeling and had a completely different style from any other book he owned. "Shopkeeper, what book is this? How come I've never seen it before? Which of the honored scholars wrote it?" the middle-aged scholar asked. Oh, Scholar Zhang, that's not the case. It's a new book that was sent over this morning. And the person who wrote this book is rather famous. Our great Tang's king of foreign lands. I heard that he spared no effort to write this book. I'm planning to treat it as a treasure of my store and even keep one book for myself. The book merchant cheerfully smiled. "What?" The scholar was astonished by these words, his eyes flying open. "The king of foreign lands?" He had long ago heard that the king of foreign lands was a far-sighted strategist who could decide victory from 1,000 li away, the great Tang's new war god. But he had never heard that the king of foreign lands had any attainments on the scholarly path, or that he had even written a book. The scholar suddenly left the meat bun store and grabbed the book. He happily opened it, but after only taking a few glances, he suddenly paled. "Shopkeeper, how much for this book?" 10 coins. "But I'm not selling," the book merchant subconsciously replied. But before he even got to selling, he heard the cling of 10 coins being thrown on the counter. Scholar Zhang had taken the book and left without another word. "Hey, your meat buns!" Thump, thump, thump. A set of hurried footsteps resounded through the Secretariat Advisor residence. After just 4 hours, a Confucian sect disciple rushed into Li Juanxian's room. The weather was not particularly hot today, but the disciple's body was drenched in sweat and he appeared extremely uneasy. "Young master, it's bad. The king of foreign lands has written a book that's selling like crazy. The entire city is astir over the book, and almost everyone in the capital has a copy. The situation is extremely bad." "Heh, is that so?" Given the time that has passed, it's about time for him to make his counterattack. But his way of counterattacking was to write a book pushing his theories. Li Juanxian gently smiled and waved his hand, his expression composed and carefree. Given all the time that had passed since the reduction of the army and the start of the anti-war marches, if Wang Chong wasn't planning to just sit around and wait for his death, this was about the right time for him to show some movement. If Wang Chong had done nothing at all, it would have left him truly rather surprised. Young master, that's not it. The situation is different. Young master, just take a look and you'll understand. To Li Juanxian's surprise, the Confucian sect disciple began to coldly sweat even more, his entire person even more overcome with anxiety. He apparently had thousands of words on his mind but didn't know how to say them. His face red with agitation, he decided to just open the bag at his side and offer the book he had bought from the marketplace. There was a sheet of paper laid out in front of Li Juanxian, as he had been planning to do some writing. Li Juanxian had originally not placed too much attention on the book presented, but when he saw the simple title, he immediately paled. "Let me see that." Li Juanxian's expression became extremely grave. Even as the brush laden with ink dropped onto the paper and left a giant stain, he paid it no attention. Flap, flap. When he took the book and flipped to the first page, Li Juanxian felt like he had been struck by a lightning bolt, his face completely draining of blood. Gone were his composure, carefreeness, confidence, and grace. Impossible. This can't be. Li Juanxian trembled as he read the book, his face growing paler and paler. For the first time in his life, Li Juanxian was in complete disarray. He finally understood why that disciple had been so panicked and uneasy. This was no longer a simple book. This book shook the very foundations of the Confucian sect and the Confucian school. Boom! Whether it was Li Juanxian, the Confucian sect, the Grand Preceptor, or King Qi, none of them had expected Wang Chong's counterattack to be so vicious, so tyrannical, so terrifying. Wang Chong had already been stripped of all military authority, and in the court, the combination of the first prince, Li Linfu, King Qi, the Grand Preceptor, and Li Juanxian had completely monopolized political power. They had originally believed that no matter how capable Wang Chong was, he wouldn't be able to stir much of a storm. But contrary to their expectations, even without military or political authority, Wang Chong had still managed to create a storm that no military or political authority could have achieved. Wang Chong had directly attacked the hearts of the people. Might makes right. The strong eat the weak. In this theory, just where do the benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom of my great Tang go? In a bamboo forest within the capital, an old Confucian read the book in his hand, his body trembling in fury. Heresy! This is blatant heresy. The person who dared to say such words should be strangled to death. Elsewhere, an irascible and renowned Confucian of the capital slammed a palm against his table, his face twisted in rage. A mighty king of the great Tang dares to expound such a theory. Even pigs and dogs are better than him. Elsewhere, 4 or 5 Confucians who had been criticizing Wang Chong in front of the marching crowds had gathered together, all of them wrathful. Putting aside the reaction of the Confucians, once might makes right was fully distributed to the capital. It created an earthquake and impact that no one could imagine. In the thousands of years of history of the Central Plains, there was no previous example of a general publishing a scholarly treatise, and this one was written by the illustrious king of foreign lands. Its effects in the capital were particularly unexpected. On the early morning of the same day, there were only a few copies of the book in the marketplace, but in a short time, this number ballooned into the hundreds, then the thousands, continuing to climb with dizzying speed. Around 6 hours later, it was no longer just a hot commodity in the capital, but throughout the entire realm, setting off an earthquake in the empire. Even many of the people who were marching stopped their protests so they could get their hands on the book and see what it said. 2 days, 3 days, the storm was intensifying, ultimately transforming into one that engulfed all of the great Tang. Might makes right. The strong eat the weak. Survival of the fittest. Law of the jungle. Those who use war to seek peace will create peace, but those who seek peace through compromise will bring about peace's end. Help oneself and be helped by the heavens. These new and unprecedented arguments were like a breath of fresh air, and they also delivered an enormous ideological blow to the minds of the people. Never before in the history of the Central Plains had a book so forcefully exposed the relationships between countries and people. Moreover, it used a blatant method to illustrate the law that governed which people survived in this world. These arguments opened the minds of the populace. The surging tides in the capital that so ardently opposed war and favored peace were instantly stymied. It was like a bucket of cold water had been poured over the crowd, causing them to calm down. Longxi, Big Dipper City. Gashu Han stood on the blackened walls, reading the book Might Makes Right, which his subordinates had delivered as quickly as possible from the capital. He stroked his beard and smiled, his body brimming with excitement. To Gashu Han, this small book was a supreme treasure. Ha ha ha, a good book, a good book. Wang Chong, this general didn't judge you wrongly. 1,000 memorials and 10,000 remonstrations cannot compare to this book of only some tens of thousands of words. The ancients said that a silver tongue can surpass a mighty army of 1,000,000. I didn't believe this in the past, but now I do. Gashu Han's eyes glowed with a strange light, and the cloud of worries that had covered his brow for many days had been swept away. This was the best news he had heard ever since the Confucian sect had entered the court and begun to suppress the militarists. The heavens are protecting the great Tang. If the Central Plains has you, the country will be forever blessed, and the age will continue unbroken. Gashu Han's loud laughter drifted far into the distance. Ha ha ha, good, good, good. You truly are the person that I know. I just knew that you wouldn't stand by as the hearts of the people developed into this state. In the distant Anxi Protectorate headquarters, Gao Xianji was looking at his own copy of Might Makes Right, delivered by an express courier from the capital, his entire body bursting with enthusiasm. The current state of the Great Tang was embodied in the saying, "When it rains, it pours," and Gao Xianji felt the same way. In this short period of time, it felt like the skies over the Great Tang had fallen, with far too many incidents taking place. In this situation, even though he was an important subject of the empire, Gao Xianji still felt a deep helplessness. Military might was not omnipotent, and there were places that not even martial prowess could help one reach. Moreover, a commander could not leave his post without orders. This fact alone made Gao Xianji incapable of doing anything. This kid really does dare to say anything. In the distant biting protectorate headquarters, and Sishun muttered to himself as he gazed at the message in his hand and the book on his desk. This kid really does have some guts. In Yuzhou, after reading the message in his hand, Zhang Shogui sneered, flicked his sleeve, and immediately left. That boy in the capital truly had caught him by surprise. But this was not Zhang Shogui's current concern. Have you found those 2 traitors yet? Milord, we discovered them in the land of the Shi and Chitons. Whoosh! While Wang Chong was printing and distributing Might Makes Right on a large scale, countless messenger birds were flying toward the various countries bordering the Great Tang. More than 4,000 meters above sea level, in the royal capital that was the center of the towering Tibetan plateau, Dalen Trinling's brows were tightly furrowed. At his side were 2 objects: an intelligence report from his spy in the Great Tang's capital, and Wang Chong's book, Might Makes Right. This book had been sent over some time ago, and from the moment it had arrived in his hand, Dalen Trinling had become motionless, his brows furrowing tighter and tighter. Imperial Minister, the suppression of the militarists by the Confucian sect within the Great Tang is an extremely rare opportunity for us, but the king of foreign lands writing this book might pose a severe danger to our plans. The great general of the Yarlung royal lineage, Namri Songtian, was standing behind Dalen Trinling, his eyes brimming with concern. There was no doubt at this time that the Great Tang was the center of the world. The slightest movement from its lands would immediately be reported to the surrounding countries, even the most ordinary and everyday decisions made by the imperial court. Imperial Minister, nothing good can happen if the king of foreign lands is allowed to succeed. Not only will our attempt to use the Confucian sect to utterly suppress the Tang army have failed, if the Great Tang begins to do as this book says, a sheep will become a wolf and will truly begin to pose a threat to us, Namri Songtian said. Yu Sang and the Great Tang had spent several centuries battling against each other, winning some and losing some. For Namri Songtian, this was the normal routine. A few decades later, regardless of whether it had won or lost, Yu Sang would have recovered its energy. As long as they waited, all the defeats and humiliations Yu Sang had suffered from the hands of the Great Tang would be returned 100-fold. But with this book, the situation was entirely different. If Wang Chong were truly allowed to succeed, then given the enormous influence he held in the Great Tang, that empire would become an empire of wolves and tigers, and that day would truly be the end for Yusang. What effects has this matter had on the Great Tang so far? Dalen Trinling suddenly asked. People are fighting each other to get a copy, Namri Songtian replied. Wang Chong's book had far greater influence than he had expected, which was one of the reasons for his great concern. This book is already out there, and there's nothing we can do to change that. Our only option is to try and minimize its effects. Dalen Trinling's expression was calm, but deep within his eyes was a rare tinge of worry. Although he had still yet to meet Wang Chong, in this first exchange, Dalen Trinling had already sensed the threat this king of foreign lands posed. There was no question that this was a monstrously powerful foe. Inform our men in the Central Plains to think of every way possible to purchase these books. It's impossible to destroy every copy, but we can still try our best to reduce the number of people able to read it. In addition, tell Li Junxian that the actions of the king of foreign lands have made us extremely uneasy, and that this is not the conduct of a country that longs for peace. Have their Confucian sect think of a way to resolve this matter, Dalen Trinling said. The king of foreign lands was definitely not an easy character to deal with. He could only drive the tiger to swallow the wolf. Flap flap. As eagles and hawks took off in distant Mount Sanmi, the name of the book Might Makes Right had the entire mountain quaking. Bastard! How could this sort of thing happen? A furious roar came from the massive golden tent at the summit. In a great clamor, countless tables and chairs were overturned as Ishbara Kagan raged. Ishbara Kagan's eyes were open wide and his chest was heaving. At the Battle of Talas, the Great Tang had used an army of 100,000 to defeat a foe 10 times its number, and in the following Battle of Khorasan, the Arabs had suffered so many losses that the number exceeded 1 million. Even the Arab war god, Qutayba, had died to Wang Chong. Ishbara Kagan had always believed that the Western Turkic Khaganate was incredibly powerful, but it had not reached a level where it could contend against the Arabian Empire. If not even Arabia could deal with the Great Tang, just which country could? It was precisely this string of battles that had broken all of Ishbara Kagan's confidence, and he was now extremely apprehensive of the Great Tang's king of foreign lands. No, this was no longer apprehension, but fear. And this fear had played no small part in the Western Turkic Khaganate's swift agreement with the other countries to reduce its army. Just what is that Confucian sect in the Great Tang doing? Do they not know what will happen if this book is completely distributed throughout the Great Tang and everyone accepts its ideas? Ishbara Kagan found it impossible to remain calm. This book scared him more than an army of 1 million men. No one understood more than him just how terrifying this book was. Whether it was the Western Turkic Khaganate or the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, they had been able to suppress the various dynasties of the Central Plains, which often had 10 times their population, constantly forcing them into a passive defense while they launched attack after attack. Because the Turks had wolfish natures while the Tang and all those other dynasties were like sheep, or perhaps one could call them scholars. For the strong men of the steppe, scholars were cowards. It was a principle of the world that wolves ate sheep, but if the Tang of the Central Plains accepted the ideas of the king of foreign lands, the Western Turks would no longer be facing a sheep, but a wolf that was just as vicious as they were, perhaps even more. This was Ishbara Kagan's deep fear. All the maids in the tent trembled in fear. The only people able to maintain their composure were the Blackwater shaman and Wunu Shibi. But when they gazed at that book, the two of them also had exceptionally grave expressions. There was no question that if the king of foreign lands were allowed to succeed, he would not just be deciding the outcome of a single war, but settling all the wars far into the future. A great Tang whose people were all soldiers, adhering to the principle of the strong, and carrying a desire to expand was a nightmare for all the countries around it. Your Majesty, now is not the time to consider this. Koluo, send your people to tightly watch for any movement in the capital. Wunu Shibi suddenly said, his eyes turning to a fierce Western Turkic general at his side. If things go bad and that kid's ideas are accepted by all of the Great Tang, a war will be coming. Yes, my lord. The general swiftly left with this order. Gerlin, pass on my order. All the troops should be ready to go to war at any moment. With Wu Shibi's prompting, Ishbara Khagan also returned to his senses. The Western Turks were too far away to do anything about the events going on in the Great Tang's capital. They could only prepare themselves for the worst-case scenario and see how the situation developed. Goguryeo, the Shi, the Khitans, and Mengshi Zhao to the southwest all felt fear and unease upon learning of the events in the Great Tang's capital. Meanwhile, Wang Chong's might makes right had been like a match setting alight the powder keg that was the capital, and it was having far greater influence than anyone had expected. At this time, it had the attention of both the court and the people. The marchers swiftly quieted down while the tea houses were filled with people discussing this book. Swords and sabers can destroy the bodies of humans, but they cannot destroy a man's ideals. In the relationship between countries and peoples, in that boundless dark forest, if one does not recognize the importance of courage and martial might, the only thing awaiting one is death. In a tavern of the capital, a man gripped the book in his hand as he muttered to himself. This phrase written on the final page of Might Makes Right had attracted his notice. There were many phrases in Wang Chong's book that had elicited fierce discussion from the crowds, and this was one of the most famous lines. As the man muttered to himself, a hint of understanding appeared in his eyes, and he somewhat calmed down as he began to look back on his fierce anti-war stance. Perhaps peace isn't bad, but it's not as easy to achieve as I imagined and requires great price and effort. Just like this book says, only courage and martial might can maintain this peace. The man tightly clenched the book as if it was the most precious treasure in the world. He had read so many books, but none of them had ever given him such a unique feeling, had ever enlightened him like this. Similar events were taking place in every corner of the capital. The words might makes right were spreading like a flame throughout the entire empire, opening the minds of the people and having them examine in depth the ideas they held in their hearts had a greater effect than imagined. In the space of a single night, all the anti-war voices fell silent. But in this calm, undercurrents were surging. Presumptuous. This is far too presumptuous. This is merely a warrior with no attainments in learning, and yet he writes a book advancing his theories. Just who gave him this audacity? He actually dares to question the millennia-old teachings of Confucius and Mencius. That's right. We cannot permit such heretical teachings. Everyone, let's join together and censure the king of foreign lands. Once this pig-dog theory gets out and starts taking root, it will poison the land for 1,000 years. That youngest son of the Wang clan wouldn't even be able to pay for his crimes with 100 deaths. The 3 principles and the 5 virtues 1, ruler as ruler, subject as subject, father as father, and son as son. These things are the root of the world, the origin of all things. If all this is destroyed, what will we be left with? In a school in the western part of the capital, 10 some erudite Confucians had gathered together, all of them seething with anger. The ideas in Wang Chong's book had become so widespread in the capital that even their own students had a copy. The Confucian school emphasized benevolence and righteousness, but now they were studying heretical ideas like the strong eating the weak. It was simply a disgrace. They had already confiscated these books from their respective schools quite a few times, but their bans proved fruitless. Finally, an influential Confucian suddenly stood up, his expression agitated. Report this matter to the schoolmaster. No matter what, we must stop it from continuing to be published. Similar scenes were taking place throughout the schools of the capital, and all this news was gathering in the Secretariat Advisor residence in the western part of the city. At this moment, all the chairs and tables used in the reception hall for guests had been cleared away. Li Junxian sat cross-legged in the center of the hall. Around him were piles of letters and petitions from various illustrious Confucians. Almost all these letters censured Wang Chong and his might makes right, each letter steeped in wrath. What worried Li Junxian the most was the information inadvertently revealed in these letters. The ideas in this book were spreading like a plague, gaining more and more influence in the people. No matter what, we have to stop this. Li Junxian's eyes had long ago lost their vim and vigor, leaving behind only concern, unease, and determination. His entire life and the life of the entire Confucian sect had been used to prepare for one thing: At a crucial moment like this, Li Junxian could not permit anyone to ruin his plans. Anyone who dared to do so was his enemy. Whoosh! A gust of wind caused the pages of the many books in front of Li Junxian to stir. If one looked carefully, all of these were copies of Might Makes Right that Li Junxian had had his people buy. These formed an arc in front of Li Junxian, and he had long ago memorized their contents. Wang Chong, you brought this on yourself. Li Junxian raised his head, his eyes shining with sharp and vicious light. At this moment, all that he had learned and all his aspirations gathered in his mind. Raising his brush, he wrote 3 large words on the paper before him: benevolence and righteousness. Who? A gale of wind spread out from Li Junxian's Secretariat Advisor residence, spreading over the entire capital. After Wang Chong's publishing of Might Makes Right, another storm began to engulf the capital. The capital was bound to remain restless, as 8 days after Wang Chong had published Might Makes Right, 2 more books, called Benevolence and Righteousness and Doctrine of Birds and Beasts, began to sweep through the Great Tang like a hurricane. And the author of these 2 books was none other than the illustrious Secretariat Advisor Li Junxian, whose silver tongue had caused the surrounding countries to reduce their armies by a total of nearly 1 million soldiers. The 2 books were targeted at Wang Chong's Might Makes Right and criticized every word and sentence of it. One was the Secretariat Advisor while the other was an advisor-in-waiting, and both had rendered great service for the Great Tang. The conflict and struggle between the 2 quickly had all of the Great Tang shaking. Shopkeeper, give me a copy. I want one too. It's not 1 book, but 2. What? Gone so fast. The bookshops of the capital were thronged with crowds. In a single day, Benevolence and Righteousness and Doctrine of Birds and Beasts were both sold out. Even though all the printing shops of the capital were working overtime to print more, they still could not satisfy the demands of the capital's populace. This was an unprecedented storm, even surpassing the previous factional dispute. Although no one had said anything, everyone knew that Li Junxian represented the Confucians while Wang Chong represented the militarists. The book Might Makes Right had fully described the standpoint of the militarists, and the ideas Wang Chong had espoused had undoubtedly enraged the entire Confucian school. This was precisely why Li Junxian had written Benevolence and Righteousness and Doctrine of Birds and Beasts. This clash symbolized a full-on battle between the militarists and Confucians, and was highly likely to decide the future of the entire Great Tang and the Central Plains. Each person and each faction could smell an extreme danger in the air. Winds will herald a coming storm. The Great Tang is about to experience a transformation. In a massive estate in the western part of the capital, a clan patriarch held Might Makes Right in one hand and Benevolence and Righteousness in the other, his eyes tinged with deep concern. Even major clans like his felt fear over the conflict taking place in the capital. This was an extremely precarious state, and the slightest lack of caution would send one plunging into the abyss, their body crushed to powder and their bones shattered. To not know of propriety, to not understand benevolence. If everyone respects only strength, then how are men any different from birds or beasts? To not know of propriety, to not understand benevolence. If everyone respects only strength, then how are men any different from birds or beasts? A good saying. What is this might makes right? A crooked way, a wicked path. Someone should have stood up a long time ago to teach him a lesson. In the southern part of the capital was a bamboo forest. Here was a small bridge crossing a gurgling stream, and many illustrious Confucian scholars had gathered in this forest. They held the 2 books Li Junxian had published, Benevolence and Righteousness, and Doctrine of Birds and Beasts, their expressions brimming with excitement. They had waited for so long, but the Confucian counterattack was finally here. Came fast, vicious, and sharp beyond compare. Who cares about the king of foreign lands? What can he do, even if he's the son of heaven's disciple? Anyone who dares to espouse such heresy must have their reputation ruined and be disdained by all. Let's use this might makes right as a chance for all of us to join together and make sure he doesn't get out of this in one piece, several Confucians excitedly said. At the same time, elsewhere in the capital, a general who had taken off his armor walked into a restaurant. There, another general wearing civilian clothes was waiting for him. This conflict is a chance. The matter of Khurasan from before was one thing, but this time we must help the king of foreign lands no matter what. That's right. We generals have always been quick to act but slow to speak, causing us to be constantly suppressed by the Confucians. Now that the king of foreign lands has published a book and spoken up for the militarists, we have to support him. Helping him is helping ourselves. The two of them stared at each other across the table, both of them seeing the same resolve in each other's eyes. Since ancient times, the number of militarists who had been able to write a book espousing their theories was far too small. What authors there were would normally write about the art of war, which nobody other than generals would read. As for things like the strong eat the weak, survival of the fittest, law of the jungle, and the dark forest one, these were things that no one had ever mentioned before. Not even the most formidable war gods and generals in history had ever used this method to distill the essence of militarist thought, expounding upon it in such a deep and open manner that even the common people could accept it. The Confucians have already begun their counterattack. Benevolence and righteousness and doctrine of birds and beasts are only the beginning, and there will probably be even more actions taken soon. We have to think of a way to embed the theories of the king of foreign lands deep in the minds of the people and spread them as much as possible. The two of them shared a glance, clinked cups, and a few moments later, they left the restaurant. Whoosh! Countless birds were flying out of the capital at every moment, headed in all directions. From the moment Li Junxian had published his 2 books, 2 streams of thought had begun to fiercely clash in the capital. The storm they created earned them the attention of the rulers of all the surrounding countries. Yusang, the eastern and western Turkic Khaganates, Goguryeo, Mengshizhao, Arabia, the Shi, the Khitans. The entire world was watching this clash of ideologies taking place in the center of the Great Tang. This storm in the Great Tang no longer concerns only itself. Our Goguryeo and all the other countries bordering the Great Tang are now involved. Send King Gagwan II over with 1 million taels of gold. Have him purchase as many copies as he can of Li Junxian's Benevolence and Righteousness and Doctrine of Birds and Beasts from the book merchants and get them into the hands of every Tang person as quickly and as cheaply as possible. I want all the Tang to be able to buy these books for cheaper than it costs to print them. If the king of foreign lands and his might makes right are allowed to win in this war, not only will our entire Goguryeo be invaded by the Great Tang, the entire empire might never be able to recover again. Yun Gaisaman stood on the high walls of Baisa, his 6 sabers on his back, his warrior aura unsurpassed by any other expert. He gazed toward the distant central plains with a look of unprecedented solemnity on his face. He had taken part in many wars, exchanged blows with Zhang Shogui many times, and defeated countless famed Tang generals. But none of these wars had felt more dangerous to him than this clash of ideologies taking place in the capital of the Great Tang. The unseen blade was often the fastest and sharpest. Gallop! With Yun Gaisaman's order, several hours later, a force of several hundred soldiers carrying massive quantities of gold quietly departed the Goguryeo Empire. Yuzhou had been sealed off by Zhang Shogui and his Anong Protectorate army, making it almost impossible for the Goguryans to get through. But there was still a road called the Water Road. If one set out from Wando and the wind was favorable, one could quickly get around Yuzhou and reach the interior. At the same time, on the distant Tibetan plateau, the winds were howling as a vulture flew out of the clouds and landed in the royal capital. The Confucians finally made a move. In order to deal with the Tang, we have to use the Tang. After reading the letter, Dalen Trinling breathed a sigh of relief. Tell the Eastern and Western Turks to start playing their arts. In the name of our 3 countries, we will inform the Great Tang that the King of Foreign Lands is a constant threat to the surrounding countries. If they can successfully deal with the King of Foreign Lands and minimize the influence of this affair, Yusang and the Eastern and Western Turks will become allies of the Great Tang. If Arabia attacks, our 3 countries are willing to aid the Great Tang in fighting against Arabia. Imperial Minister, are we really becoming allies with the Great Tang? A general responsible for taking notes said, his expression frozen in shock. Humph! Dalen Trinling said nothing, only shot a cold glare at the general. The general trembled and his body paled. He immediately lowered his head and continued writing. The only person now who can deal with the king of foreign lands is that little Confucian. I trust that he will know what to do once he sees this letter. With these words, Dalen Trinling left the hall, the capital of the Great Tang. Flap, flap. Countless messenger birds flew over the high walls of the Wang family residence and into its courtyard. Thump. A few moments later, Su Shixian and Su Kai ran into Wang Chong's study as if they were on fire. "Milord, it's bad. The situation has worsened. Li Junxian of the Confucian sect has written 2 books, one Benevolence and Righteousness and one Doctrine of Birds and Beasts, both of them targeted at us. The entire capital is agitated, and all the Confucians have joined together to oppose us." Su Kai and Su Shixian panted for breath, their faces red and uneasy. Wang Chong's book, Might Makes Right, had created a far greater stir in the capital than they had imagined. The tens of thousands of words within it had stimulated all the illustrious Confucians of the capital into fierce opposition. Countless Confucians had joined together to rebuke Wang Chong, and many of them had imitated Li Junxian by writing their own tracts critical of his ideas. Wang Chong was now the target of the entire capital, and countless storms and gales were making their way to the Wang clan and Wang Chong, making the two of them extremely worried. Public opinion was powerful enough to melt metal, and accumulated slander could wear away at the bones. There had never been a militarist who had offended the entire Confucian school like Wang Chong. The sheer power of their verbal and written rebukes could make anyone tremble in fear. Su Shixian and Su Kai couldn't help but be worried about this. "I understand." Wang Chong's indifferent voice rang out in their ears as he sat behind his desk, his expression calm. This voice was infused with some inexplicable power that immediately caused Su Shixian and Su Kai to calm. Both of them stared in a daze at the seated Wang Chong. "I expected the Confucian school to respond sooner or later. There's no need to worry about it," Wang Chong nonchalantly said as he moved his brush across the paper on his desk. A few moments later, he had finished writing the last words and placed the brush back on the rack. "Since I've written Might Makes Right, I might as well publish this Doctrine of War as well. Make arrangements to have this book sent to print as quickly as possible." 10 some papers were stacked together on the desk. It was not as thick as Might Makes Right, but it wasn't a thin book either. The two of them lowered their heads and respectfully replied, "Yes, Your Highness." Wang Chong nodded. This Doctrine of War was an elaboration of the intercountry relations discussed in Might Makes Right, and extended the discussion to methods of war, and the purpose of war. The 1 billion taels of gold Wang Chong had demanded from the Arabs in the Battle of Khorasan had caused a stir throughout the empire. This was a brand new method that was unprecedented in history. Even Gao Xianji had been greatly shocked by it. There was no need to occupy enemy territory or kill even more enemy soldiers. By relying on negotiation and threats, one could reap enormous rewards and enrich the country. This was a breath of fresh air to all the generals. Wars were fought in service to the empire. This was a simple principle. But in this era, in this world, not many people understood. Wang Chong had already had the idea of writing a book so that he could try and alter how the people of this era thought about war. Given the stir he had already created, he decided that there was no better time than now to write it. In addition, Su Shixian, Su Kai, have you prepared the things I asked you about? Wang Chong stood up, placing his hands behind his back. Su Shixian bowed and said, "Your Highness, although it took some time, everything Your Highness requested has been found." In this task, Chun Burang played a major role. Reality is superior to any fierce argument. Remember, our opponent is not the Confucian school, but the hearts of the people. Whether it's 1,000 words or 10,000 arguments, none of them can compare to one's own eyes. Begin the operation. Wang Chong looked through the door toward the endless sky, his eyes shining with wise and profound light. Thump. After handling all these matters, Wang Chong waved his sleeve and went to another room. This room was pitch black, its doors and windows sealed so that no light could get in. A black-clothed old eagle was standing within, silently waiting. "How was it?" Wang Chong asked. "Your Highness, General Bahram was able to successfully escape. In addition, according to your Highness's orders, we have already sent a threat to the Arabs. If the Arabs continue to pursue, the Second Battle of Khorasan will soon take place. The Arabs are still extremely apprehensive about your Highness. Although the pursuers were incredibly unwilling, they still decided to retreat. In addition, the ballistae that General Su Hanshan had waiting in ambush for them also made them much more obedient," Old Eagle said. He had just returned from Yusang and the western regions. The gravity of the matter at hand meant that Old Eagle had to personally go and deliver the orders. "Very good." Wang Chong breathed a sigh of relief. This can be considered a blessing in the middle of a disaster. The distance between the capital and Khorasan was vast, but even so, he had been constantly paying attention to the events around it. Chang Qianli, Su Hanshan, and Li Sai had marched across vast distances, and though they had failed to prevent the Sasana dynasty from falling once more, they had managed to save Bahram and the Aswaran cataphracts, persuading the agitated Bahram to preserve his life and conduct a strategic withdrawal. Moreover, the terrifying reputation of Wang Chong and the Great Tang army in the Arabian Empire had also played a major role. The 6,000 Wuxian cavalry, all of them armed to the teeth, eyeing the Arab army like tigers, compelled the Arabs to give up on their pursuit of Bahram. Have Bahram and his men sent to the northern region of the Tibetan Plateau. Put them in the steel fortress at the Triangular Gap for now. Yusang's northern region is basically devoid of troops, and even if they do send soldiers, we can use the steel fortress to hold out. In addition, inform Gao Xianji and the Anxi Protectorate that if they notice a large-scale mobilization from Yusang, they should immediately dispatch reinforcements," Wang Chong said. In the aftermath of this war, the entire region west of the Tsong Mountains had become unsafe for Bahram and his men. And within the Great Tang, those people in the imperial court could intervene at any moment. But there was no problem with the triangular gap of the Tibetan Plateau serving as a temporary haven. "But what if the Confucian sect interferes?" Old Eagle worriedly said after some thought. "Li Junxian has mentioned many times that he wants to return the triangular gap on the northeast corner of the plateau back to Yusang. That's beyond his control. He's already returned 700 million of the 1 billion taels of gold to Arabia. Does he also plan to return the triangular gap to Yusang? In the end, he wasn't so stupid as to return all the gold to Arabia. Moreover, the triangular gap has already become a vital area where the imperial court raises horses, so I'm confident that the court will not agree so easily. In addition, I've already requested the Bureau of Military Personnel to delay any possible attempts," Wang Chong calmly replied. The Confucian sect was increasing the range of its activities. In order to maintain peaceful relations with Yusang and prevent any dangers lurking beneath the surface, they had set their eyes on the steel fortresses around the Triangular Gap. However, the Triangular Gap was not a part of the Great Tang's interior, and the Secretariat had even now not confirmed if they would include it within the territory of the Great Tang or drawn any maps that indicated this. Simply put, the Triangular Gap was a no-man's land, and this special situation was something that Wang Chong could exploit. Li Junxian had brought up the issue several times of returning the Triangular Gap to Yusang, but Wang Chong had been able to use the Bureau of Military Personnel to delay and stall the matter each time. "Your subordinate understands," Old Eagle respectfully said. "There's another matter?" Wang Chong suddenly said, his eyes flashing in the dark and quiet room. "Go to Sindhu with some people and escort the first batch of 200,000 Sindhi through the Triangular Gap, Qixi, Longxi, and to the southwest. I've already made arrangements, and Su Hanshan, Great General Geshu, and Protector General Shenyu have all agreed. From the southwest, take boats and take the first batch of Sindhi overseas." "Ah!" Old Eagle was stunned by these words. His Highness plans to send this first batch to the Promised Land. Although Wang Chong had not said anything specific, Old Eagle instinctively thought of the Promised Land. Old Eagle had only happened to learn of it by chance, but Wang Chong had never written or said anything about it. The one who probably knew the most in Wang Chong's faction about it was probably his older cousin, Wang Liang. Even Old Eagle only knew that this promised land was a mysterious continent across the vast ocean, isolated from the world. The land there was abundant and fertile, the climate suitable. It was almost the size of the Great Tang's interior. But since ancient times, this continent had actually remained completely ownerless. This was simply inconceivable. One had to realize that around the Great Tang, any piece of land, no matter how small or trivial, was occupied by some tribe or people. For such a large piece of land to have no humans was simply a fairy tale, and anyone else would treat it as such. But Old Eagle knew that not long ago, Wang Chong's older cousin Wang Liang had followed Wang Chong's instructions and had discovered this promised land. As this thought flitted through his mind, Old Eagle lowered his head and bowed. This subordinate will deliver this order. Whoosh! As Old Eagle was leaving the Wang family residence, a messenger bird flew into the Secretariat Advisor residence. A Confucian sect disciple quickly received it. After glancing at the letter, he hastily made his way to Li Juanxian's room. Young master, the spy team has sent a message. The Confucian sect disciple bowed and offered the letter with both hands. Read it. Li Juanxian was seated cross-legged on the floor, his right hand swiftly moving across a low table. Yes. The Confucian sect disciple obeyed the order, opening the letter and beginning to read. The spy team's message is that they've discovered that the men of the king of foreign lands have found a hunter and bought a wolf from him, and this matter was personally overseen by Wang Chong's subordinate Su Shixian. Oh! Li Juanxian's brush paused, his brow creasing. When did this happen? 3 days ago. That wolf was put in a cage and sent to the capital under the personal guard of Su Shixian and his men. The Confucian sect disciple said with a bow. Li Juanxian put down his brush, a solemn look in his eyes. The conflict between the militarists and Confucians was at its most intense, and Wang Chong was at the very heart of the storm. His every movement was being closely watched by the Confucian sect, as were his close subordinates. Su Shixian, Su Kai, Xue Qianjun. The Confucian sect had obtained detailed reports on all these people. Wang Chong would not normally mobilize them, but when he did, it was not for any trivial task. Bamboo Mirror of the spy team says that this matter is extremely suspicious. Merely buying a wolf or tiger doesn't require Su Shixian to be personally sent. Thus, he reported this matter to request young master's guidance. The Confucian sect disciple sternly said. Li Juanxian said nothing, his head slightly raising as he began to think. So, is it the law of the jungle? Li Juanxian muttered, a profound light in his eyes. Wang Chong's might makes right had caused a great clamor within the capital, and in order to deal with it, Li Juanxian had bought many copies of the book. Thus, he knew the theories Wang Chong had espoused in this book like the back of his hand, and the law of the jungle was one of the most famous of these ideas. Tigers ate wolves, wolves ate sheep. This was the law of the animal kingdom, the principle of the world. If Wang Chong was buying a wolf at this time, his goal was obvious. Pass on my order. Search the western regions for the most formidable beast tamers. Have them capture several tigers, wolves, and sheep. Whether it's tigers or sheep, all these creatures should be kept in the same place and made to live in harmony. Remember, if the king of foreign lands shows off that wolf, you should have the beast tamers show off the tigers and wolves being kept in the same cage. I'd like to see what else he has to say when the tiger doesn't eat the wolf and the wolf doesn't eat the sheep, Li Juanxian sternly said. Unlike the Central Plains, the land of the western regions, Arabia, Charaxpazinu, and all the other western lands were home to extremely skilled beast tamers. They could train fierce beasts like tigers and wolves so well that even when dogs or sheep were placed in front of their mouths, they would not eat them. Wang Chong said in his book that the law of the jungle was the law of nature. When the time came, he would have no retort. Yes, your subordinate will go. The Confucian sect disciple turned and left with this order. Soon after, the entire Wang family and all of Wang Chong's subordinates fell under the tight observation of the Confucian sect. The conflict between militarists and Confucians was a vital affair that had entered a critical juncture. The Confucian sect did not dare to be careless. Half a day later, in Azure Dragon Street, one of the busiest streets of the capital. Bang! With the thump of a heavy pillar, several dozen workmen appeared and began to set up a stage. Even before the stage had been completed, a massive banner was thrust next to it. On it were written the words King of Foreign Lands. Another banner soon followed, but this was a white banner upon which the words Might Makes Right were written in a bold and vigorous style. Hua! The moment these words appeared, a crowd began to gather around and chatter. Stand aside. Let me see. Hurry up. The crowd was in a clamor. By now, the entire capital and all the realm knew of the words, Might Makes Right. And after Li Junxian published his Benevolence and Righteousness and Doctrine of Birds and Beasts, even more people had begun to pay attention to this storm. And though they did not publicly make their stances known, even the great clans and nobles of the capital were keeping a close watch to see how this matter developed. Reporting. The King of Foreign Lands has begun moving out. The first beam had just been thrust into the earth of Azure Dragon Street when a Confucian sect disciple mounted a horse and galloped in the direction of the Secretariat Advisor residence. Has it finally begun? Li Junxian narrowed his eyes as he suddenly stood up. In a sensitive time period like this, anything with the words Might Makes Right on it was no trifling affair. Are you already so brazen now? Humph. Prepare. I'd like to see what he's trying to do. With a wave of his robe, Li Junxian stepped over the threshold and vanished into the hall. Azure Dragon Street, as one of the busiest streets in the capital, was lined by an uncountable number of restaurants, tea houses, and taverns, all of them magnificently decorated and adorned. The renowned Vast Crane Pavilion was also on this street. Bang! An ornate boot stepped over the threshold and into Vast Crane Pavilion. The moment this person appeared, a waiter came over to welcome them. Honored guest, this is truly embarrassing. There are no more seats available. The man, who was wearing a wide-sleeved robe, suddenly said, There's not even a spot for me? My apologies, truly. The waiter was just about to say more when he raised his head and saw who this person was. He instantly paled and was struck speechless. This person was none other than the owner of Vast Crane Pavilion, the patriarch of the Yao clan, Yao Guangyi. Ma master! The waiter trembled in fear. He had truly gotten into trouble this time. Who would have imagined that the boss would personally make an appearance? Yao Guangyi waved his sleeve and indifferently said, Just go. Yes, master. This lowly one will prepare a room for you. The waiter left in a panic. Yao Guangyi waved his hand and did not continue to make an issue. After stepping through the door, he began to ascend the stairs to the second floor. I've finally returned. As he gazed at the familiar scenes, a hint of emotion appeared on Yao Guangyi's calm face. The conflict between militarists and Confucians was one that surpassed all other factional wars. Yao Guangyi had originally planned to remain in the capital to assist King Qi. After all, King Qi was incredibly concerned about this matter. But the Yao Old Master in Four Quarters Embassy had sent an order decreeing that Yao Guangyi should be sent out of the capital to the distant border. The Old Master had said that this conflict between militarists and Confucians was a perilous one in which the slightest lack of caution would end with one being caught in the crossfire and being targeted by all. It would have been fine if the Yao clan had been a purely scholarly clan, but all the great clans were involved in both civil and martial affairs. To assist the Confucians and cut off the militarists was cutting off one's own arm, which was tantamount to suicide. It was far better to just leave. But this was now the most critical moment in the conflict between the Confucians and militarists, with the books espousing the theories of both sides pushing the effects of the conflict to their maximum. Moreover, King Qi had been defeated by Wang Chong in the penal court, a matter which King Qi regarded as an utmost disgrace. Thus, he had forcefully called Yao Guangyi back from the border so that he could gather all his strength and suppress Wang Chong. However, even though Yao Guangyi had returned to the capital, Yao Guangyi had done his utmost to heed the old master's words. Don't speak if there's no need to, and give King Qi your full support for minor and irrelevant matters. This had allowed him to remain uninvolved so far. Bang! The moment he stepped onto the second floor, Yao Guangyi was greeted by a massive clamor, as if he had stepped out of one world and into another. Looking around, he saw that the second floor was packed with the great clans and nobles of the capital. With a cursory glance, he had already spotted several officials of the court. Lord Yao! Lord Yao! The moment Yao Guangyi appeared, everyone on the second floor inwardly trembled and called out in greeting. An emaciated camel was still larger than a horse, and the Yao clan was a tree that had stood for 100 years. Although each generation was inferior to the one before, and it was not as flourishing as the Wang clan. As long as the Yao Old Master existed, the Yao clan would still wield unprecedented influence. Yao Guangyi nodded and greeted the guests one by one, not putting on any airs. The manager of Vast Crane Pavilion had already stepped forward, bowing and scraping as he led Yao Guangyi toward a room with a balcony that had a clear view of that stage. As Yao Guangyi walked up to the balcony, he was immediately frozen in shock. Across the street, in another restaurant, was another familiar figure. Grand Tutor! Yao Guangyi's heart thumped in alarm at this sight. Even though Grand Tutor Chunyong's figure was obscured by a black curtain, Yao Guangyi had recognized him at a glance. Grand Tutor Chunyong was the imperial teacher and mostly resided deep within the palace, rarely leaving its confines. The sage emperor had even constructed a residence in the imperial palace for his personal use. And Chunyong had little interest in other matters besides the education of the princes and princesses. Yao Guangyi had not imagined that the ideological conflict between the militarists and Confucians would draw the Grand Tutor out of the palace. And this was only the beginning. Yao Guangyi shifted his gaze and immediately spotted another figure, straight and motionless like a spear thrust into the earth. Crown Prince's junior guardian, Wang Xianxia. Yao Guangyi was becoming more and more alarmed, and there were few people that could alarm someone with as high a status as Yao Guangyi. But the Grand Tutor and Crown Prince's junior guardian were definitely in this exclusive group. The former had a revered status equal to the Grand Preceptors, and as the Emperor's teacher, his status could even be considered to be a little higher. As for the Crown Prince's junior guardian, Wang Xianxia, this was a true war god of the Great Tang. If he had not decided to retire at the height of his career, his status would have by now been comparable to the war god of Taizong's era, Su Zhengqian. This was an uncrowned king of the Great Tang who had accomplished countless astonishing feats. Even the reputation of the king of foreign lands, who was currently one of the most renowned figures in the empire, could not compare to the prestige Wang Xianxia had wielded back then. Chunyong and Wang Xianxia. Neither of this pair would usually make an appearance. Yao Guangyi had not expected that this conflict represented by Wang Chong and Li Junxian would even draw them over. And as he continued to look, he saw the investigating imperial censor, the Duke of Wei, the Duke of Zhao, the director of the Secretariat, the Purple Azure Bright Minister. He now saw that the nearby restaurants, tea houses, and taverns were full of various major officials of the court. Although none of them said anything, there was no question that they had come for one thing. Although he had somewhat mentally prepared himself, Yao Guangyi still couldn't help but gasp. When he learned the news, he had believed that he would be the official of the highest status coming to watch, but he now realized just how wrong he was. This clash had long ago dragged in the entire imperial court, perhaps even the entire Great Tang. This was no longer some ideological battle, but a battle for the fate of the country. It would decide the Great Tang's future for the next several centuries, perhaps even millennia. Only this could explain why so many people had appeared here. Putting aside Vast Crane Pavilion for now, bang! In a flash of light, a person wearing a snow-white robe smoothly crossed over the threshold of the building across from the stage. Young master, everything is taken care of. The moment Li Junxian appeared, a disciple of the Confucian sect appeared to lead him to the highest floor. The Confucian sect had operated for 1,000 years and was firmly rooted in the Central Plains. Although it normally did not reveal itself, the Confucian sect actually owned quite a few businesses in the capital. With a calm expression, Li Junxian nodded and ascended the wooden stairs to the highest floor. A pot of jasmine tea had already been prepared, along with a white porcelain cup. With a wave of his sleeve, Li Junxian seated himself by the table, his every move oozing style and grace. Has it begun? Young master, from their progress, it will probably be another 30 minutes. A gray-robed elder bowed. From the ink symbol on his wrist, This was yet another member of the Confucian sect. Li Junxian nodded and fell quiet. The sounds of hammering filled the streets as the workmen labored. After only an hour, the stage was almost complete. Through the reputation of the master architect Zhang Shouji and his own mastery of steel, Wang Chong had succeeded in gathering many elite workmen under his banner. These people possessed amazing craftsmanship and efficiency. Boom! As the last piece of the stage was completed, all of Azure Dragon Street fell silent as if a whirlwind had just passed through. The vast crowd stared in a daze at a single point, none of them making a sound. And in the various restaurants, tea houses, and taverns, Li Junxian, Yao Guangyi, Grand Tutor Qinyong, Crown Prince's junior guardian Wang Zhongxi, and all the other luminaries turned to look. No one said anything, but all of them had expressions of utmost solemnity. Whoosh! The blustery winds caused a massive golden banner atop the walls of the imperial palace to snap. No one noticed, however, that a figure of enormous aura had also appeared on the wall. Hee, what a scene! Hu Dequan, what do you think the king of foreign lands plans to do with that stage on Azure Dragon Street? The first prince stood on the walls, his hands behind his back, his hair and imperial robes tossing and flapping in the wind. Even though he shared the same standpoint with Li Junxian and the Confucian sect within the imperial court, the first prince had remained a bystander in this clash of ideologies. While the conflict between Wang Chong and Li Junxian had far-reaching effects on the empire, it had little effect on the imperial court and the first prince. On the contrary, as the empire's future crown prince, the first prince was only too happy to see such ideological clashes, since this meant that everyone was working hard to serve the empire. Your Highness thinks too highly of this old slave. This old slave would not dare to speculate on matters of the court. Next to the first prince was a tall yet extremely thin eunuch wearing a silver robe, his body bowed. The old eunuch's eyes were sharp like blades, but his hands were concealed in their sleeves. If one looked carefully, one would notice that his hands were pitch black and appeared extremely dangerous. It was clear that this man cultivated some unique and formidable art. Heh! The first prince chuckled. The back palace was not allowed to meddle in politics, and eunuch officials were naturally included in this. However, the first prince had great trust in this old eunuch, as this eunuch had accompanied him since he was a child. "It's begun!" the first prince suddenly said, and everyone at his side, including eunuch Hu Dequan, turned to look. The imperial palace was some distance from Azure Dragon Street, but with the help of the high walls, the first prince had a clear view of more than half the city, including Azure Dragon Street. Although he couldn't see many details, nor could he see all the major officials who had gathered in the surrounding restaurants, taverns, and tea houses, he could clearly make out the stage that the king of foreign lands had built. Besides that, he had countless spies who could report back on the situation at any time. This spectacle can't be missed out on. The first prince faintly smiled. Bang! The center of Azure Dragon Street had now become the undisputed heart of the capital. With a boom, two fully armored soldiers stepped forward with a giant cage draped in thick blue cloth and placed it onto the stage. The entire world seemed to be shaking as silence reigned. Whether it was the major officials or the ordinary people and merchants, all of them were staring at the massive cage. What is this? The people stretched out their necks and widened their eyes, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was inside. Is it starting now? On the top floor of the restaurant, Li Junxian gripped the slender porcelain teacup, his body exuding a transcendent aura of elegance and grace. After taking a glance at the cage on the stage, he turned away. Get ready. If they remove that cloth within 3 days, our people need to be ready to go out. Your subordinate understands. Following young master's orders, we have already found the beast tamers young master wanted. Within 2 days, they should arrive at the capital to resolve this crisis. The Confucian sect disciple replied. Although the distance was far, the Confucian sect had its special methods to get these people to the capital as quickly as possible. Li Junxian nodded and continued to silently watch. There was yet another development taking place on the stage. Tap, tap, tap. As countless people watched, a soldier with a grim and inflexible face climbed up the steps to the high stage, walking straight up to the cage. He held a cudgel 3 to 4 feet long in his hand. At a time like this, it was obvious what he intended to use it for. Everyone stared at the soldier with bated breath. Whoosh! The cudgel suddenly swung upward, instantly raising the shroud. As the blue cloth flew into the air, time seemed to stop. Everyone in the crowd and in the restaurants and tea houses turned to look at what was beneath. Of all these people, only the Confucian sect already knew its contents, but a moment later, when the shroud was taken away, everyone was left utterly shocked. Arf! Arf! The sharp cries of a young dog came from the cage. What's going on? There's a dog in the cage? What is the king of foreign lands trying to do? When they saw the contents of the cage, the originally enthusiastic crowd turned to each other in shock. It was such a large spectacle, setting up a stage and even sending up a cage escorted by soldiers. But in the end, all this was for an adorable dog that was no more than 4 months old. The moment the cloth was removed, the dog rushed up to the side of the cage and began to lick the bars while passionately barking at the crowd below. The crowd began to chatter. The King of Foreign Lands had caused a large stir with this event, placing 2 large banners with King of Foreign Lands and Might Makes Right upon them next to the stage. Everyone believed that the King of Foreign Lands was going to have everyone accept his point of view, but none of them had expected there to be a dog in this cage. Everyone's minds felt rather blank. What's going on? Shouldn't it be a wolf? In the closest restaurant, several of the Confucian sect disciples behind Li Junxian turned to each other in shock. Even Li Junxian couldn't help but crease his brow at this moment. From the information they had received, Wang Chong had clearly bought a wolf and had already sent it to the capital. But rather than the wolf, what had appeared was a dog. The Confucian sect members were flabbergasted. And it wasn't just the Confucian sect. The major officials who had filled the buildings on both sides of Azure Dragon Street all frowned in confusion. No one understood what the King of Foreign Lands was trying to sell. This fellow's way of doing things truly is unconventional. It's impossible to predict. In Vast Crane Pavilion, Yao Guangyi gazed at the barking dog and sighed. In the past, Yao Guangyi had thought of the incident at Vast Crane Pavilion as a coincidence. After all, a teenager couldn't possibly be so smart and quick-witted as to ruin his plan. But now that he looked back at it, all of it had been clearly planned out, and there was not the slightest hint of coincidence about it. A small beginning would indicate how things would develop. If a teenager already had such ability to scheme against Yao Guangyi, then Wang Chong's achievements now were nothing strange at all. Not just my Feng no one in this generation of our Yao clan, not even me, can compare to this child. At this moment, Yao Guangyi's eyes turned incredibly dim. The Yao clan and Wang clan had battled for a lifetime now. When both old masters had still held their posts, they had essentially exchanged blow for blow, and there were even occasions when the old master of his clan had the slight upper hand. But in his generation, and in his son Feng'er's generation, the Yao clan had fallen completely behind. It didn't even have the right to compete with the Wang clan anymore. How could this thought not leave Yao Guangyi anguished? Meanwhile, a horseman had galloped off the moment the shroud had been lifted, riding in a trail of dust toward the imperial palace. What? A dog? Ha ha ha! Interesting, interesting. This matter is truly getting more and more interesting. Upon the towering golden walls of the imperial palace, the first prince received the report from his guard. At first he was shocked, but then he couldn't help but laugh. As for the unfathomable old eunuch with pitch-black hands, Hu Dequan, he was also somewhat taken aback at first, but then he began to chuckle along with the first prince. Regardless of the occasion, anything that could make the first prince happy made him happy as well. Wang Chong, let this prince see what exactly you're trying to sell. After a long while, the first prince retracted his smile, leaving only an amused look in his eyes. The confusion of the crowd did not last for too long. A few moments later, another pair of armored guards carried a massive cage onto the stage. Boom! The cage hit the stage and something hit the iron bars from the inside, causing them to clang and rattle. Whoosh! A Wang clan guard gripped the shroud and pulled. The crowd called out in alarm as a massive gray wolf with bared teeth and a savage face was revealed. staring hostilely at the guard outside the cage. Wah! On the street, a child being held by an adult cried out in fear and burst into tears. But before the crowd could come back to its senses, an arm encased in armor reached into the cage, heedless of the wolf's teeth, then seized the wolf's neck and took it out of the cage. Clang! At the same time, the other guard cooperated by opening the cage holding the dog. Thump! In the blink of an eye, the savage wolf had been thrown into the same cage as the small dog. In this entire process, the two guards were emotionless and straightforward. But down below, their actions caused shock and dismay. Ah! Everyone was frightened out of their wits, and some people even turned their heads away, not daring to see what would happen next. Given the ferocity of the wolf, one could already imagine what would happen to the dog. The people of the capital already found this scene far too gory to watch. Child, don't look. Some parents rushed to cover the eyes of their children or turn their heads elsewhere. But the gory scene of wolf devouring dog did not take place. On the contrary, the barking dog became abnormally friendly. It ran around the wolf, constantly barking and appearing incredibly affectionate. The gray wolf immediately shed its savage appearance and became incredibly docile. It even extended a tongue and affectionately licked the small dog. If one examined only its behavior, one would have mistaken it for a dog. Hua! The crowd was startled by this scene. What's going on? That wolf didn't eat the dog. How could this be? Is it really a wolf? All the people in the crowd were stunned. Wolves were savage, and if one encountered a wolf out in the wild, there was a 90% chance that one would end up dead in its maw. The scene before them was completely different from what they had imagined. Ha ha! King of foreign lands, weren't you all about the law of the jungle, and the strong eat the weak? At this moment, a loud voice came out of the crowd, and a Confucian 20-some paces from the stage pointed a finger at the cage, his expression agitated and his voice particularly resounding. Now, the wolf doesn't eat the dog, and the wolf and dog live in harmony. Is this not just hitting your own face? Even beasts know what affection is. King of foreign lands, I'd like to see what you have to say now. Wang Chong's stage on Azure Dragon Street had not only attracted the common people, but also the illustrious and learned Confucians. Their original plan was that once Wang Chong tried anything, they would completely disregard whatever he was up to and directly criticize him. But they had not expected the plans of the heavens to be superior to their own. Although Wang Chong was the noble king of foreign lands, he had still made such a major mistake. Wolves were savage, but they did not eat dogs. Was this not exactly in line with the Confucian school's benevolence and righteousness? Another Confucian immediately turned around and called out to the crowd, "Everyone, if even beasts can be like this, why not men? What might makes right? It is all nonsense. Everyone, burn those heretical books. They're misleading the younger generation." Buzz! The crowd immediately began to quietly chatter amongst themselves. There were also some spies from Yusang, Goguryeo, Mengshizhao, and the Eastern and Western Turks in the crowd. When they saw this scene, they smiled and sighed in relief. This incident had drawn many spies the various countries had placed in the Great Tang's capital. Countless spies had been drawn to the stage in Azure Dragon Street, all of them silently watching to see what would happen. Hurry and send a letter to the imperial minister. There's no need to worry about the king of foreign lands for now. Wolves eat meat and can't possibly be this obedient. There must be a problem with the person he uses to tame beasts. He must have fed the wolf too much, and if the wolf is full, it naturally wouldn't eat the dog. This is a mistake from the king of foreign lands, but we can get some use out of it. Underneath the eaves of a pharmacy, a Tibetan spy slightly lowered his head, concealing it beneath a bamboo hat. Bamboo hats were commonplace in the Great Tang, and they were excellent for hiding the faces of Tibetans. Understood. Behind him, another Tibetan spy whispered back, and then turned around and left. At the same moment, other figures elsewhere also turned to leave, and afterward, countless birds took off into the air and scattered in all directions. Young master, the king of foreign lands has made a major mistake this time. In the restaurant across from the stage, a Confucian sect expert standing behind Li Junxian couldn't help but chuckle as he watched in glee. Haha, what king of foreign lands? We've probably been overestimating him this entire time. He clearly miscalculated this time. Another Confucian sect disciple loudly laughed. Even a fool could see that Wang Chong had miscalculated this time. This wolf and dog coexisting went completely against the theories of his might makes right, and even served to refute them. No, something's not right. As everyone else was laughing, a voice interrupted. Li Junxian, holding the teacup and wearing his white robe, appeared like a scholar in a painting, but those straight and handsome brows of his were deeply creased. Wang Chong isn't some nobody. He would never make a mistake like this. There's something else going on here. The scene before him was incredibly advantageous to the Confucian sect, but Li Junxian had interacted with Wang Chong before. Someone who could find his trail after spending only 3 days in the capital and then meet him in Drunken Moon Pavilion would never commit such a low-class mistake like this. But this scene, not even Li Junxian could give an explanation as to why Wang Chong had made such a childish mistake. There was no question that this was a complete refutation of the theories he espoused. Even Li Junxian was still trying to understand what Wang Chong was trying to do. Buzz! A strange feeling suddenly welled up in his mind. Li Junxian immediately turned in the direction of the energy he had sensed, and a moment later, his pupils constricted and his face paled. Wang Chong, the king of foreign lands. These voices did not belong to Li Junxian, but to 2 Confucian sect disciples who had followed Li Junxian's gaze. Although they had only had a glance before that person had vanished within a restaurant, this was already enough for the people of the Confucian sect to recognize that person. To think it would be him, an elderly voice sounded out. The heavily wrinkled elder song, wearing an azure robe, had at some point appeared at Li Junxian's side. He gazed at the restaurant, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous light. The relationship between the Confucian sect and Wang Chong was currently like fire and water. There was no more need to keep this person around. Don't be rash. Everyone, only watch. You can't touch him, Li Junxian softly said. The moment Elder Song had spoken, Li Junxian had known what he wanted to do. Countless experts had gathered in Azure Dragon Street at this time, and even great Tang war god Wang Zhongxi had surreptitiously made his way to a nearby restaurant. To strike the king of foreign lands at this time would be a most unwise decision. Moreover, a person who could kill Arab war god Qutayba was truly not easy to deal with. Li Junxian's eyes had not been wrong. As everyone else was focused on the stage, Wang Chong, dressed in civilian clothes, had entered a nearby restaurant. He had chosen the place for this activity, so he had naturally already reserved this restaurant. Is it ready? At the top floor of Roaring Vault Pavilion, Wang Chong seated himself on a wide armchair. From this spot, he could clearly make out everything down below, including the thronging crowds and those agitated Confucians. Even though the Confucians were venomously criticizing him, Wang Chong did not care at all. Your Highness, everything is ready. He can go onto the stage at any time, Su Shixian said with a bow. Let him go then. Wang Chong waved his hand. Su Shixian quickly left to deliver the order. Bong! A few moments later, there was a banging of gongs and drums. All became still as a hunter wearing coarse clothes and a wolfskin tied around his waist was escorted to the stage by a Wang clan guard. Behind him was none other than Su Shixian. Buzz! The moment Su Shixian and this hunter appeared, they immediately became the center of attention. The crowds quieted down, and even those Confucians who had vehemently been criticizing Wang Chong stopped and looked over. What's this fellow up to now? No rush. Let's see what happens first. The Confucians turned to the stage to see how things developed. In their restaurants, Yao Guangyi, Li Junxian, the Grand Tutor, and the Crown Prince's junior guardian, as well as all the other great clans and nobles of the capital, quietly watched. Su Shixian didn't even glance down at the crowd. Once everyone had mostly become quiet, he turned to the hunter and asked, What is your name? The hunter raised his head and fearlessly said, Chen Dazhong. How long have you lived in the mountains? Su Shixian asked again. This sudden conversation immediately had everyone's attention, all of them finding it rather strange. Hadn't the Wang clan arranged for this hunter to show up? Why did this conversation sound like they had no relationship whatsoever? On stage, the hunter laughed and said, "My family have been hunters in the mountains for generations. Since the time of my grandfather's grandfather, we've been living in that mountain village. When I was 7, I accompanied my father in hunting, and it's been 40-some years now." Su Shirshian knocked on the iron cage and asked, "Did you raise this dog?" "Hey, yes. Don't look down on its size. It has a very sensitive nose and is able to sniff out anything on the mountain from far, far away." All was quiet as the crowd was increasingly entranced. Some people were beginning to realize that this matter was not exactly what they had imagined. "If you're a hunter, why did you come to the capital?" Su Shirshuan's question instantly had the interest of the crowd, and everyone stared at the hunter. Because the king of foreign lands said that if I could answer just a few simple questions, I could get 100 taels of gold from him, and then I can go back to my mountain. I wouldn't be able to make that much in a year, even if I spent every day of it hunting in the mountains. I only need to answer a few simple questions, so why wouldn't I come?" The hunter replied. Bang! The hunter's answer caused an uproar in the crowd, and within his restaurant, Li Junxian frowned. From the sound of it, Wang Chong had made no attempt to bribe this hunter into saying anything in particular. While it seemed absurd, he was confident that someone of Wang Chong's status would not have someone speak such a low-class lie in front of so many people. But this only made Li Junxian even more confused as to what was going on. "Then let me ask you, how did you get this wolf?" Su Shirshian was emotionless as he once more spoke to the hunter. This hunter was the chief hunter of his mountain village and was 50-some years of age. He had a calm and composed personality, and it was only someone with this sort of personality that could remain so fearless and confident in front of such a large crowd. Last year I hunted down and killed a mother wolf. When I went to its den, I found several wolf cubs. In the middle of winter, with the mother wolf dead and no one to feed them, those wolf cubs would be doomed. At the time, I was somewhat unable to bear it, so I took the wolf cubs back home with me, deciding to have them be playmates for my son. These wolf cubs didn't eat dog food and starved to death, one after the other. In the end, this was the only one left. It guards my house for me and is quite a decent assistant," the hunter said. "Why does this wolf not eat the dog?" Su Shirshian asked again. "This wolf cub was only able to survive by drinking the milk of this dog's mother, and it grew up together with this dog, eating, sleeping, and playing with each other. How could it eat it?" "Right, my lord, is that all? If that's all your questions, I'll take the 100 taels of gold, spend a few days in the capital, and go home. It happens to be hunting season. There's one last question. Have you heard of benevolence and righteousness and might makes right? Which one do you think is correct?" Su Shirshian sternly said. Everyone waited with bated breath for the hunter's answer. On the road I heard people talking about this. Everyone in the Great Tang is talking about these 2 books, and your people even brought up this matter to me on the road. I'm just a lowly hunter, so there's no way I could know anything about such high-level problems. But there's one thing that I do know. Although your lord says that all creatures are beasts, that tigers eating wolves and wolves eating dogs is the law of the jungle, this isn't an absolute. At the very least, the wolf that I raised will never eat a dog, at least not this dog that I raised. The hunter loudly laughed. "Is that so? Are you really sure?" Su Shirshian shot the hunter a profound glance. When this hunter stepped onto the stage, Su Shirshian could sense that everyone believed that the Wang clan had sought out this hunter's help. But Su Shirshian knew that they had said nothing to this hunter nor done anything to him. The hunter himself didn't even know why he had been brought here. All his answers were sincere expressions of his thoughts, unaffected by the opinions of others. Sir is making a joke. It might not be the case for anything else, but no one understands the beasts of the mountains more than us hunters. I can guarantee that this wolf cub that I raised will never eat a dog," the hunter confidently proclaimed, patting his chest. Buzz! The crowd began to chatter. If they were dubious at first, everyone was slowly beginning to realize that this hunter truly was an ordinary hunter that the Wang clan had found deep in the mountains. There had been no collusion between the 2 parties, or else the hunter would have never said such words. And his expression did not seem to be one of a liar. The crowd spoke in hushed voices to each other, each person befuddled. If the Wang clan had not colluded with this hunter, what game was the king of foreign lands trying to play? In the surrounding restaurants, all the nobles and influential officials who had heard this conversation creased their brows. Forgive my slow eyes, but not even I can tell what the king of foreign lands is up to. I've always heard that the king of foreign lands is unconventional, but his way of thinking truly is unfathomable. In the Moon Lake Pavilion across from Vast Crane Pavilion, the Duke of Zhao creased his white brows. Lord Duke, even I am left befuddled. Didn't the king of foreign lands want to defeat the Confucians? By doing this, isn't he just doing the reverse and defeating himself? A noble next to him said. The others in the party glanced at each other in confusion, all of them speechless. Young master, what should we do now? In the restaurant across from the stage, a Confucian sect disciple bowed, confusion in his eyes. Withdraw. There's no need to do anything else. Li Junxian frowned and waved his hand. This hunter had already thoroughly described their standpoint. Finding some more beast tamers was completely unnecessary. After some thought, Li Junxian waved a hand and called over a Confucian sect disciple. Come. Immediately send people to investigate this hunter, including how Wang Chong's people got in touch with him. The more detailed the report, the better. Yes. The Confucian sect disciple swiftly left with this order. Elder Song stepped forward and said, Young master, the king of foreign lands has given us a difficult problem this time. Li Junxian nodded. Wang Chong had completely upset his previous plan, rendering the countermeasure useless. Send some people to keep a close watch on them. Inform me as soon as possible of any sign of activity. We must see how this situation develops. Li Junxian sternly said. Understood. Elder Song nodded. On Azure Dragon Street, the event had finally reached its final moments. Very good. Everyone clearly heard what was said just now. The dog is yours and the wolf is yours too. Since you're so certain that the wolf won't eat the dog, let's make a bet. If it really is as you say, His Highness is willing to pay you an additional 10,000 taels of gold. But if you lose, my lord will not have to pay you anything. Take your things and return to your home. And you will naturally not have any chance at some 10,000 taels of gold. Su Shixian sternly said. The hunter suddenly paled. He had never expected something like 10,000 taels of gold, and Su Shixian and his men had never even hinted at such a possibility. Chen Dazhong, everyone here heard it and can serve as your witness. We've also even informed the Court of Judicial Review of this matter. If you can prove what you say, then the 10,000 taels of gold will all be yours. As Su Shixian spoke, he gestured behind him. Rumble. Four muscular soldiers carried up a heavy iron chest and placed it on the stage. The moment it was set down, everyone could feel the stage quiver. Okay, let's go. Su Shixian looked around at the guards around the stage before leaving. Let's go. At almost the same moment, Wang Chong stood up from his seat and left the restaurant. The show was basically over. I hope that this can finally make everyone understand. Wang Chong inwardly sighed before he left. An empire could not be changed in a single night. This was a method he had thought of to resolve this problem from the smallest possible cost. The Confucian sect was incredibly efficient. On the night of the same day, an extremely detailed report on the hunter Chen Dazhong was sent by messenger bird to the Secretariat Advisor residence.